Hello guys and welcome. My name is LaLand Romero. I am a visual effects artist, and today we're going to be looking at how to create a smoke effect from scratch inside of PopcornFX. Let's get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the PopcornFX editor. I'm just going to double click on it. So that brings us to this window right here, and right now I'm using the SDK version 1.7.3, and the package that I'm going to be using for this tutorial, it's Sample Particles Editor version 1.7.2, and I have already created my project. If you haven't done so, I will encourage you to go to wiki.popcornfx.com, go to the tutorials section, and in there you will find 3 really cool tutorials that cover the editor download and install, basic project setup and editor UI, and basic navigation. I will cover some navigation, but if you guys want to know in depth, just go ahead and watch those tutorials. Today what we're going to do is we're going to create an effect from scratch, but it will be cool if you guys can watch those tutorials just to kind of they should get you started with setting up the project and downloading the packages and a few other things. Okay, so let's now so if you have already downloaded the package, just double click on your project. And please select the you wish to recover. I don't want to recover anything right now. It's fine. All right. So this brings us to the content editor right here. So we have our editor with all of our effects right over here, and you can see them over here. Each one of them with a thumbnail. Some of them don't have a thumbnail, just because it was never created for those effects, and we are also going to learn how to do that today. So you can create an effect from scratch 2 ways. You can either right click over here at the content browser, and then you can just say create asset particle system, or you can just go into one of the directories in here. And this, by the way, this is the tree view is the same file structure that you have for your project. So in my case, I created my project under the Unreal projects. Here's the PopcornFX one, and as you can see, all of these directories and files are the ones that I have right here. So what I'll do is I'm just gonna right click here, create asset, particle system, give it a name, PFX, particle, tutorial, smoke 03, whoops, 03, and okay. All right, so now that we have our newly created effect, I am going to double click on it right here or here. Okay, so as soon as we double clicked on that effect, that fired up our particle editor, and here we got some particles going on our real-time. Okay, so as soon as we double clicked on that effect, that brings us over to the particle editor, and here we got some particles going on our real-time editor, and we got different panes over here. We got our node properties right here, our particles tree view right here, particle effects attributes right here. This over here changes depending on some of the nodes that we're selecting, right? And I'm gonna get into that in a second. But before we go any further, I just want to cover some bullet points of the things that that I want to cover with you guys today. So the first one is obviously how to create a new particle effect from scratch, basic navigation controls and the real-time editor, how the particle billboard renderer works, how to use a texture atlas, some basic scripting. We're gonna also look at creating new evolvers, how to rotate particles, how to control particle size and color with a custom curve, and how to create a thumbnail of our effect for the content browser. All right? Okay, so I know that some of you really want to get into knowing what it's going on over here, and we are gonna do that. But the very first thing that I want to do is just cover some basic navigation shortcuts that I'm going to be using in this tutorial. And if you have used Maya, then that should be fairly easy for you. And for those of you who haven't, it's gonna be no problem as well. The buttons that I'm going to be using today are going to be Alt, left mouse button, Alt, middle mouse button, and Alt, right mouse button. So right now, if I just press Alt, middle mouse button, that allows me to pan the camera around my effect. If I press Alt, left mouse button, then I'm rotating the camera, and you can see also here the position of the camera, right? And if I press Alt, right mouse button, it allows me to dolly forward and backwards. All right? Now, if you feel like you want to know more shortcuts and more keys and, every possible secret shortcuts that comes with PopcornFX, then just take a look at the video number 3, I think it is, at wiki.popcornfx.com. There's the Viewport navigation, and it covers in detail a lot of other shortcuts that you might want to utilize in your work, and whenever you're creating your particle systems. All right, and besides the navigation controls that I just mentioned to you guys, over here you can save your file, right? Over here you can reset your particles, and you can stop them over here. Right now they're set to loop, so they're not really going to stop. But if you had them going in a different way, which we'll cover later on, right? So this is the default loop that gets set every time you create a new particle system, but we'll get into that later on. But anyways, you can save your work right here, right? And yeah, we can just save it, and you can reset your particles right here. The other thing that I don't want to forget is that we have this reset button right here, reset view. And what that does is it resets the position of the camera. So let's say that you moved your camera all the way over here and you got lost and you don't know how to get it back. Just press the reset. It resets the view of the camera, right? And but the cool thing about it is that, let's say that I want to have my effect over here, I can use another cool feature, and is this one over here, capture view coordinates. And what this will do is it will capture these coordinates right here, right? And when I move my camera now, move it over here, maybe rotate it, I don't know, do whatever I want to do, and I'm lost again. Well, I can just press the reset button and it will bring me back over here. All right, cool. So I think that's enough for navigation controls. Let's get going with our smoke effect. Okay, so let's go over some of the attributes that we have going on over here. Okay, so now let's talk about the nodes. that we have located here, and the particles tree view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close all of these guys over here so that, yeah, it's a lot better. Okay, so we have the editor properties. When selected, this one displays the node properties panels, the configuration of the effects editor for this effect, right? Then we have the backdrop, and the backdrop, let me just close that, and this one here too. And this one, what it does is it, displays the list of the backdrops available. Right now, as you can see, we have 2D layer background and 3D layer scene. And if I click on the eye right here, and this one here too, then we're hiding the model. So right now we have a model in the scene, and there's also a light, right? So this is the global light and the scene. Let me just select it again. There we go. And yeah, so the reason why you are not seeing, oh, okay, so let's move over the particles tree view. The first thing right here is the editor's property, right? And this one displays the node property panels, right? Okay, so let's talk about the nodes located in the particles tree view. The very first one right here is the editor properties, and when selected, displays in the node properties panel the configuration of the effects editor for this effect. Actually, let me just close some of these so that way we don't have too many things open, and we can just focus on these guys over here. The backdrop displays in the node properties panel the list of the backdrops available. Right now, as you can see, we have the backdrop is displaying 2D layers and 3D layers, right? If I hide the 3D layer and turn on or enable the visibility on the 2D layer, you can see that we have this layer right here called layer brush, right? And if I right click on top of the 2D layer backdrop directory, I'm able to create images for my background. Okay, so that's the one that we have available right now. I can hide that, and now I can turn on the model. So this is the model that we're currently using in the scene, and it's obviously dark because the light, there's a global light that also gets created, and that one was off. Anyways, so I'm gonna leave that there. I don't need the 2D layer. I don't need it to be on. I just we can do just fine for this tutorial just with the 3D model right here. Okay, let's close that. Let's go over to the global properties, and these are just global properties related properties. Controls the runtime and editor, and not save in the PopcornFX file. So we don't have to worry about this right here. Let's go over right here. Okay, so we have our attribute sampler. Okay, so the attribute sampler, right? All particle samplers are accessible in script, and they can be referenced by using the sampler name directly. For this tutorial, I don't actually know, we're not going to be using it, but if you right click on it, right, you can create a new sampler, and you can create things such as let's see, the C particle sampler shape, and as I said before, right, you can reference so the particle samplers, right, so they are accessible in script, and they can be referenced by using the sampler name directly. So something like position, right, I can access it to the spawner script over here, and we're not gonna get into that right now, but let's say that I don't want the particles to come from just one point. I want the particles to be emitted from a bigger container, like a sphere or the box, but I want the particles to be emitted from the outer edges of the box, right? Then I will use something like the sampler. Okay, so the attribute samplers, or the particle samplers, right? All particle samplers are accessible in a script, and they can be referenced by using the sampler name directly. And what that means is that you can right click over here, you can create something like the C particle sampler shape, and right now we're emitting our particles just from one point, but I could, through scripting, which we'll cover later on, I can just write a script that will access the position of, let's say, a sphere, and I want to emit my particles from from the sphere. Then I will write that through the script. All right, so we have the attribute samplers, or particle samplers. All the particles samplers are accessible in script, and they can be referenced by using the sampler name directly. So let's say that well, the way that you add a new sampler is you right click on the sampler and you say new sampler, and then you choose from the list over here. Right now we're emitting particles from one point, but let's say that we want to emit particles from a sphere, from a bigger volume. Then I can add a new sampler. Then I can go to my script and I can access that sampler attribute and do it that way. But for this tutorial, we're not going to get into this right now. So let me just delete that. Then now we have our spawner. So the spawner is the effect root. It contains action group, contains a list of other action groups or raw actions. In here, if you wanna add a new sound, then you can do that. You're adding a new sound effect, or you can just create a new decal and a new folder. And then we have our spawner, or effect, our effect root, and this one is the one that has the particle layer, sound layer. If you right click on it, you can see we have we can create a new folder, we can add a new sound layer, we can add a new decal layer, we can paste a layer, we can delete it, and yeah, if I go over here and say delete, then there you go, we killed our effect, and I can just add it back by saying new layer, and there you go. All right, so you saw that when we created our layer 1, a few other things came along, right? So we have our fields, right? And our fields are being displayed up here in the node properties, and these are attributes, right, that we are going to be utilizing to modify our effect. Another thing that was created was events, samplers, right, which I've all right, so now we have our spawner, right? So the spawner contains our effect root. You can right click on it, and then you can create a new layer, right, which will create another effect, right there. Let me just Control Z that. You can create a new folder, you can create a new sound, you can create a new decal, or you can delete that effect. So if I go here and I delete that, right, let me just delete it, then our effect is gone, right? Let me just bring it back. I'm just gonna say new layer, right click, new layer. And as you can see, when we created our new layer, right, let me just close that up. So when we created our new layer, a few other things came along. First of all, we have the particle layer, right? This is our basic particle spawner that will emit the particles in the world. If I turn that off, right, or hide them, then we don't see any more particles. We have our fields. So when this is selected, it will display all the particle fields of that layer and the node properties up here, and we'll get to those later on. We have also events, samplers, which I have already mentioned. If I right click, I can create a new sampler, right? We have the renderers. Okay, so we have the renderers, right? So these are the nodes that are responsible for drawing the particles. Now, if I right click on it, right, and I come over here to new renderer, you have the choice between various predefined renderers, from standard billboards to meshes to lights, etc. In our case, we have the C particle renderer billboard. This is actually the most used particle renderer. It displays the particles as textured sprites. Then we have our spawner script, and as you can see, the script editor over here opens up, and this is where the particle initialization script is located. In our case, when it was created, it had a default life of 1.0 and the size of the particles is 0.25. Okay, so next we have the state _0 or evolve state, and what it does, it defines how particles will evolve during each frame of its lifetime. Okay, so in the last one, it's the state 0 or evolve state, and it defines how particles will evolve during each frame of its lifetime. It also contains multiple particle evolvers. Over here right now, the one that we're utilizing is the C particle evolver physics. Right, so in our case we have what this evolver does, it's responsible for making particles move around and be affected by gravity, friction, etc. All right, so then we have state 0 or particle evolvers. So then we have state 0 or evolve state, and it defines how the particle evolves during each frame of its lifetime. It also contains multiple particle evolvers, right? In our case, we have the C particle evolver physics. And as you can see up here, right, in the node properties of this particle evolver, we have things such as velocity, gravity, acceleration, collision. And yeah, you can right click on it, right click on the state, and then you can just add a new evolver. For this tutorial, I think that we're gonna add a couple more. I think we're gonna be also looking at the C particle evolver field, and we'll get to that later on. Okay, so let's start changing the look of these particles over here. So on the left hand side, in my particles tree view, I'm selecting my renderers, right? And I'm gonna select the C particle renderer billboard. And as you can see, we have the image right here that we're displaying on our particles. So what I wanna do is I wanna change a couple things. First of all, the billboarding material that we're using right now is additive, right? We do not want that for smoke. I'm gonna change that to alpha blend additive soft. Now we can use the just an alpha blend, but this material has some really cool things built in. one of those is that it has the soft fade out at intersections with geometry, so basically soft particles. And it also can be used to render both additive and alpha blended particles. So we're going to stick with this material right now. And the next thing that we're going to do is right here on our texture path, we're going to click over here, and this will take us to the project that we created at the beginning. And let's go under textures, and the texture that we're going to select is blast pack underscore extended.dds. All right, cool. So yeah, so we updated the billboarding material and we updated our texture, right? So you notice that in our real-time viewport, right, the texture got updated. Also notice that the particle node editor at the bottom, right, is showing a preview of the texture of the atlas that got mapped onto those particles. But that's definitely not what we want. Right now we have the whole texture atlas mapped onto the billboard. All right, so the way that we tell the C particle renderer billboard, right, that we have multiple images on our atlas is we are going to introduce an atlas definition, right? So I'm going to click over here. I'm going to go and get the file, and the one that I want is called blast pack underscore extended.pkat. Now, the atlas definition files are just simple text files, usually with the same name as the atlas texture. So when, let me just open it up. But when this atlas was created, right, that file over here also got created, right, the atlas definition file. So we're gonna have to fix a couple things. So first of all, the cool thing about it though right now is that we got rid of having our entire atlas mapped onto our particles. So now we don't have that issue anymore. And what's happening right now is we only have this image right now being mapped onto our sprites. Obviously that's not what we want. We want to be able to utilize the smoke textures over here. So that's what we're gonna do next. Okay, so now that we gave the our C particle renderer billboard an atlas definition, it's time to tell it how which textures we want to map onto our particles. So if you look at, let's see, let me just select fields over here. So if you look at fields, we now have a new attribute called texture ID 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the C particle renderer billboard, and I'm going to press the reset button right here, and that will put me back with the atlas mapped onto our particles, right? So I'm going to go back to fields, and as you can see, we do not have a texture ID attribute. So when we added our atlas definition, and let's go get it right now, the blast pack underscore extended .pkat. If we go back to fields, then you'll see that we have that attribute. And this is the way that we're going to have access to the images in here, right? So now we have our sub images in here, and each one of those images has an ID, as you can see up here, right? I want to specify which textures, right, from my atlas I want to map onto my particles. So let's go to our spawner script, and this is the first script that we're gonna write. And while I'm here, right, I want you to look up here to our node properties, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this attribute called texture ID, and I'm gonna say that texture ID is equals 233. And I'm going to put a semicolon and Control S. And I seem to have an error. Textures. Oh, I have a typo. It's supposed to be texture ID equals 233. Control S. And there you go. Okay, so another thing that is worth mentioning here is that if you are in the script editor and you press Control S, this will also save the whole particle effect. If you just want to save the script, then just press Control Enter, and that will just save the script. In case that you have a lot of stuff going on with your effect and you don't want to save the whole thing, then you can just do it that way. What happens when you go Control S is the script is saved and it is rebuilt on the fly, and you'll be able to see instantly the effect of your changes inside of the real Viewport editor. You can definitely find out more about the scripting language for PopcornFX. Just go to the wiki.popcornfx.com and look under the script editor, and that should give you a lot of information in regards to the scripting language. Okay, so back to our smoke. So right now, another thing that I want to do is let's write some velocity values, and we're gonna do that through the physics evolver, and we're gonna boost up the live up to 3 seconds to make the plume a bit higher. So let's do that right now through our script editor right here. And the way that we do that, it's the same way that we did it for the texture ID. If you look up here in the node properties, we have a velocity attribute. So let's take advantage of that. So let's type velocity equals float 3, and we're gonna say for x 0, for y 0.5, and for z 0. All right. I'm gonna put semicolon and I'm gonna Control S. All right. And I'm gonna also change the live span of my particles from 1 to 3 seconds. And there you go. So now they're going a lot higher. Okay, cool. So they're leaving now for 3 seconds, and they're moving on the y direction, right? So nothing, we haven't made any major changes just yet. The particles are looking extremely repetitive. So the way that we fix that is that we're gonna go on and select state, right? And we're gonna add a new evolver, and the one that we're gonna use is the C particle evolver rotation. Now, when I select it, if I go under fields, right, we get 2 new attributes. We get rotation and scalar rotation speed. Let me just demonstrate that again. If I delete that and I go back onto fields, we don't have any rotation attributes, right, or fields. So if I go back under states, right click, new evolver, and I'm gonna add the C particle evolver rotation, right? So let me go back under fields, and there you go. We have rotation and scalar rotation speed. Both of them are floats, okay? Let's go and select our spawner script, right? And what I want to do is I want to say that rotation is equals to a random function between -pi and pi. All right. Let me just move this up here and Control S. And there you go. So now, as you can see, we have added a random orientation to each one of the particles when they are born. Okay, so for some of you who are new to the scripting world, this isn't a scripting class, but it's worth mentioning a little bit of this function right here, which is the random function. We're gonna utilize it in a few other things. Actually, as an effects artist, randomization is your best friend. So in our case, the random function takes two parameters, right? This one and this one, right? These are the parameters or arguments, right? And returns a random number uniformly distributed between these two values, right? All right, so pi over here, right, is nothing more than the ratio of a circle circumference to its diameter, all right? And the value of pi is this right here. Right, so basically what we're typing in right now, it's this and this. Control S. And I have to make this one a positive, otherwise they all take the same orientation, and there you go. All right, so that's basically what we're doing right now. We're just saying a random function between negative pi and pi. All right? Okay. So that's all good. The fact that each one of those particles, it's getting a random orientation when they're born. But you notice that when we created the C particle evolver rotation, right? Inside fields, we got two attributes, rotation and scalar rotation speed. So let's take a look at what we can do with the scalar rotation speed. So let's type in here scalar rotation speed. And this is going to be equals to a random function with the parameters negative 1.5 and 1.5. I'm going to put a semicolon and Control S. And actually, let me exaggerate this value right here to something like 4 and 4. All right, cool. All right, so that you should be able to see that. So now what we're saying is, okay, so when the particles are born, give them a initial rotation, right? And this is the value that we're giving them, right? A random rotation when they're born. And the scalar rotation speed, right? It's taking that value and we are just continuing to rotate along that axis over the life of the particle, okay? Okay, so let's set the values back to negative 1.5 and 1.5, right? And let's go ahead and change the texture that we have going on right now. As you can see, we only have one texture. But if we go back to our C particle renderer billboard, you'll see that we actually, in our atlas, right, we actually have 4 textures. And as you can see the IDs right now, we go from ID 31 all the way to ID 35. So let's take the same concept that we did for rotation, where we're, picking random values, right, for the rotation. Let's do the same thing for the texture ID. So what I want to do is this. I want to comment this out, right, with these forward slashes, and this is the way that you make comments inside of the script editor. So I'm just commenting that out. That means that when I'm compiling, the computer will not execute that. That's just a comment for myself. So let me just do this. I'm gonna say texture ID, texture ID is equal to a random number between 32 and 35. And let me execute that. All right, so now we're definitely choosing more than one image, right? But right now, since the random function expects floating point values, we have a little bit of a problem because we will never get to this value over here, which is 35. So let's go back to the texture, and as you can see, we have ID 32, 33, 34, and 35, right? Now, the thing that I'm saying about the random function expecting floating points, let me just show you a quick example. Okay, so don't worry too much about the tool that I'm using here. The ID, this is just for me to have some values. I'm using the random function inside of Python, and then I'm just generating random values over here to illustrate the point that I'm trying to make. So let me go back to the C particle builder, right? So we have the ID 32, and it goes all the way to 35, right? And let me bring the here we go, the code sculptor. So I am saying that my first value is 32 and my ending value is 35. So if I execute, right, that random function, right, you can see over here that I'm never reaching 35, right? I can keep doing this all day and it will never reach 35. So the other way that we can reach our image, right, so that we get the 4 images, right now we're only getting 3 images. We're getting 32, 33, and 34. We're never able to get 35. What we can do is we can type 35. There we go. All right. So if I take that back over here to this guy and I say 35.99999. All right, if I now execute that, you'll see that we get 35, right? Every once in a while. If I set it back to 35, I never reach 35. Therefore, I'm only using 3 images. I never get to use my 4th image. So yeah, this is by just by utilizing the random function, and then we're telling it that we want to, that we want to shuffle and we want to pick from a random number between 32 and 35.99999. All right. Okay. Cool. All right. Let's move on. Okay, so now that we have added different texture to our sprites, right? So we're not just using one texture, we're using 4 textures. We have a random orientation when the particles are born, and we are taking that orientation and continue to spin the particles. That's all good, but let's go further with this. So now let's introduce another evolver, and the one that we want is this one over here, the C particle evolver field. So click on it and you get a warning. If you click on the menu right here, you'll see that there's something called size. Select that, right, and nothing happened. The particles went away. Select the C particle evolver field, and then that will take us to our Spline editor, right? By default, the Spline editor creates 2 points. There's one at 0, and then there is another one at 1, right? What I want to do is I want to move around these points, right, to play with the size of the particles. What I want to do is I want to have my particles small when they're born, and then over time I want it to become bigger. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to move this point all the way up right here to 1, and I'm going to move this up just a little bit more, something like that. And there you go. Okay, so we have our 2 points or keyframes, and the way that you move around in here is, right now I'm just using the middle mouse button. If I press and hold the middle mouse button, I'm just panning, and if I use the middle mouse button and I scroll, then I just move backwards and forward. Okay, all right. So yeah, you guys go ahead and play with these values. You can obviously go beyond 1. You can go all the way up here. Do whatever you want, and so that you feel comfortable with the Spline editor. Right now the curve is set to, by default I believe, is set to Spline. You can set it to linear. You can have something like that. Another thing up here is the toggle. So if I toggle this on and off, what it does is it turns off the points or the keyframes on the curve. So right now I am unable to select those, and if I turn them back on, then I can modify them, continue to modify them further. So yeah, for now this is fine. So let's move on to the next thing. All right, so the size is getting better. Actually, the look of the particles is definitely getting better. But let's start adding color, and let's fade the particles. So yeah, so let's move on to that next. And the way that we do that is by adding another evolver. Right, and this actually we're gonna use the same one. We're gonna use the C particle evolver field right now, but I wanna show you something. If we go to fields, right now what I want to do is I want to add color to my particles, and there isn't an attribute in here called color, right? So what I want to do is this. I want to right click on the state 0, and I want to add a new evolver. I want to add the C particle evolver field, right? But there isn't anything to choose over here from. So what I need to do is I need to go under fields, and I need to, under presets, I need to create a new particle field, right? So the first one that comes from the presets, it's color. So let's do that. All right. You see that the particles went away as soon as I did that, right? And it's pretty much what happened when we created our field for the size. The particles disappeared until I selected the size. So that's happening right now. So the C particle evolver field, it's waiting for us to tell it which attribute or which field do we want to utilize. In our case, we want to use color. So now the errors went away, but we don't see any particles over here, and just like the curve for the size, it's happening the same thing right now for our color. As you can see up here, now we have 4 different channels. We just don't have X, right? So we have, if we select the field, if we select color, right, we have a float 4, and we have the 4 channels, right? Red, green, and blue, and alpha. All of these curves right now are on top of each other, right? So what I want to do is I want to move them around so that I can start adding color as well as opacity. So if I move them up, then you can see in there now, right? Okay, so with those 2 points selected, press C on your keyboard, and I'm just gonna go ahead and do something like a reddish, and then maybe move them up a little bit, something like that, and click OK. All right, let me just move this a little bit over here and this up here. And I'm just gonna middle mouse button, just push the camera. Yeah, right there. Okay, so let me just tweak some of these values over here on the curve so that I can get something more along the lines of what you guys saw at the beginning of the tutorial. So I'm gonna bring, I think I'm gonna have to add more points. So let's do that. I'm gonna add a point over here. The way that you add points, it's by pressing Alt left mouse button, and there you go. And the reason why all of them went into 1 point is because they're all selected. So let's toggle them off, the ones that we're not utilizing, and actually I'm gonna Control C so that I don't have any points there, and I am going to only select the red channel. Alt left click, and there you go. All right, so let me just bring this up here. I'm gonna put this value to almost, actually, yeah, I'm gonna bring it down to 0, 0, and bring that up there. Bring that over here, and yeah, Alt, create another point, maybe move this over here, hide that, select the green channel. You already had a point over there, so that's fine. Bring this down. Actually, I'm gonna delete this point, so I'm just gonna select the point, right click, and say delete point. I'm gonna move it down to 0. Let me just go back over here a lot closer and add another point. Move that down and select the blue channel. And move that down there. All right, so let me select alpha, move that up. So what I want is I want to have the particles kind of like fade in and they become opaque and then they fade out. All right. And I want to select that red again, and I want to bring him up. Yeah, it's something up here, something like that. Let's see if I can do this over here. This doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, we want to emulate that type of oil burning smoke. And in the next lesson, we're gonna look at the actual fire that goes at the base. So you know, this is gonna work kind of working backwards on this tutorial, but it should be fine regardless. So let's do that. Let's bring that over here. That right there. And let me go back to the size. And what I want to do for the size is I want to add a point right here so that, and let me right click over here and I want to say spline. Oops, actually for the whole thing. Spline. Okay, so I can actually play with this for hours, and I'm sure you guys are gonna have a lot of fun. For now, I think I'm gonna stop right here in terms of the color. Let's move on to the next part of the tutorial. Okay, so let's let me just bring this back down over here. That's our effect. Let's go back. Actually, let's go to layer 1. Right here. All right. So we have a couple things over here. So we have our, this is for our particles. If check the particles will emit forever, but you can see them emitting forever right now, right? So they're in an infinite loop. And that's because of this right here, right? Every time there's a new system created, right, a new particle system, this get checked and the duration of the particles gets set to 2 seconds. And the life of the particles also, right here, is changed. At the beginning, you know, it was set to 1 and then we set it up to 3. So the life of the particles gets set to 1. Let's go back up here and layer 1. The duration in seconds is 2. The loop particle system is checked, and the particle count is 10. So those are kind of like the default values. I don't really want to use this right here, so I'm going to uncheck it. And what that will do is it will, let me just reset the particles, right? So if I reset the particles, right, these particles are living for 2 seconds, but I want to have an infinite loop in this case, and I still don't see any particles. That's because we have to reset the particle system. So let's do that, right? So now I get my particles, right, to have an infinite lifetime, and I have my 10 particles. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the particle count to something more like, I don't know, 55 for now, right? And as you can see, we have a lot of particles, right? But the particles are still just going straight up. I want to change that a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to see how the velocity is just going straight up on white. It would be nice if we can do a little bit of the same thing that we did for rotation, scalar rotation speed, and the texture ID. I'm going to add a random function to the velocity so that we get a more dynamic behavior. So I'm going to have the particles moving to the left, but it's going to be a little bit random. So okay, so let's take a look at how we can randomize the velocity values a bit more. All right, so the expression that I'm going to use for that is this one here, right? And just like we did it for the texture ID, we just have all of that up there. It's something like this. Right? As you can see, I have the random function right here. It goes in parentheses, right? And value 8 is this one here. And here's my other float, right, with these values inside. All right? Okay, so let's paste that over here and see what happens. And there you go. Let me just tweak that a little bit more. So let's go under size. All right. So that's a lot better already. Let's play with the size over here. Maybe bring this back a little bigger over here. And I could even bring back. So right now we're going on -x, as you can see right here. So we're going on negative x. So let's do 4. So yeah, let's go between -4 and -2. Yeah, -4 and -2.8 on x, something like that. All right. Cool. So I'm happy for now. That's looking pretty good. It has some randomization on the size of the particles. It has different textures, the rotation. We have assigned random rotation to each one of the particles when they're born, and they continue to spin over the lifetime of the particles. Let's see. So the last thing that I want to cover is adding a thumbnail to our effect. So the way that you do that is very similar to when I showed you guys earlier today to how to capture your view coordinates, right? So let's say that I want to have my effect here every time I open it up, then I just capture that coordinate, and that is the position of the camera right here, right? So that if I were to move all over the place and I want to bring that back, I just hit the reset button and it brings it back. Now, right next to this button right here, we have the capture thumbnail. Let's hit that, and that will pretty much just take a picture of what we have right now going on here and make a thumbnail off of it. So if I close this window, right, and I'm gonna save it, I'm gonna save my work, and as you can see, we have the VFX particle tutorial smoke 04 final. So I'm gonna close this. And from the content browser, it's over here, or I can just select it here. And there you go. All right. Cool. So that pretty much covers the smoke tutorial. I hope that that what I showed you guys is going to help you get started with PopcornFX, and I will see you guys on the next tutorial. Thank you so much.